Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and today on the 8.2 PTR, you guys issued me a challenge to find a single target obliteration burst spec that would be fairly viable in PvE single target situations, because a lot of you just do not like the breath spec. So it took me about 2 weeks to come up with a build, and it's really outside of what I normally expected anything to be, but we managed to come up with it. And also, not only is it good in PvE, but this build is actually extremely powerful in PvP when it comes to dealing single target DPS pressure, also increasing our burst pressure on Obliterate and Frost Strike, and I actually forced Jawa to bubble as a Frosty K with the spec. Think about that for a minute. That didn't happen in a 15-minute duel before, but now we're able to do it. It just blows my mind. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this video and talk about that. And also, I managed to hit 2K in 3s this week with Jawa playing Resto Shaman Ret Unholy DK. It was actually pretty tough considering the plethora of caster cleaves going on. But again, let's go ahead and jump into this video and do this. We're going on the target, hit Remorseless Winter. We did that backwards, not going to matter. We're just going to go ahead and throw out our big obliterates on the target here. We got a Howling Blast proc, that's what we wanted. We're going to throw out our Empower just to have a big opener, because we really want to put as many runes as we possibly can into that Remorseless Winter to deal that big damage proc. Now we finally reached that crit point, and you can see our... Now guys, understand, what I'm about to tell you sounds absolutely insane, but you got to listen to it till the very end so you can completely understand what's going on, because it's starting, you're going to look at me and be like, are you crazy, Haze? Like, what are you even coming up with? You got to stay until the end. I'll explain it all. It's going to come together and you can get it. Okay. Now, going over the talents and what we're doing on our characters. First off, for the level 56 talent, we're going to use an Inaugural Assault. For PvE and PvP, obviously for the burst spec, but PvE, Haze, are you crazy? Obviously, I am crazy. That's why I was able to figure it out. So, we're going to be sticking with an Inaugural Assault. Alright, just stick with me, guys, and I'll explain why later on. Alright, number 17 talent, Runic Attune, just for the extra runic power and the overall consistency. That's going to come in handy quite a bit. As for the 58 talents, either Blinding Sleet or Asphyxiate, obviously those are just going to be for stuns or blinds. As for the level 60 talent, it is fairly important that you use Frozen Pulse for a single target DPS. As for Cleave, Frost Scythe will also work for this spec and actually increase your overall consistency by quite a bit. I know I talked about this in a previous version, like a Mythic plus 50k plus consistency DPS on 4 targets, but this new spec is going to be able to deal a lot more consistency AoE DPS spec than the last build, just because I figured out the last piece of the puzzle to just kind of put this whole spec together. And like it took forever, because everything I did, I could just, change out obliteration for breath, and then the spec would be better with breath, but that is not the case with this build. So as for level 75 talents for PvE, you're either going to be sticking with Wraithwalk or Permafrost if you want survivability, but Wraithwalk is going to be the best way to go. As for level 90 talents, we're going to be using Gathering Storms. Now, the Azurite items are the reason for this, and I explained that in the last Mythic Plus, so you're probably not very confused about that one. Gathering Storms becomes a lot stronger in the 8.2 PTR because of the insane amount of runes you're going to be gathering because of the conversion buffs I explained in a couple of other videos. We're going to have a lot more uptime, a lot more DPS, a lot more obliterates. That's going to make our Remorseless Winter an insane amount stronger than it currently is. As for the level 100 talents, that's right, Obliteration. And for this build, Ice Cap actually works, which just blows my mind. Yeah, I know, right? Like, what do you mean Ice Cap works? No, it doesn't. That hasn't worked since the last expansion. But no, it actually worked with this. You get a little bit of less DPS than you with Obliteration. But personally, I do like Obliteration a bit more with this spec, especially if I was going into Mythic Plus. I would definitely hold on to Obliteration just for the overall consistent damage that you can get with that. Also, with the new runic power, getting the crits being guaranteed to you through Obliteration, I believe actually gives you more rotational uptime than what you currently were getting with Ice Cap. Now we need to talk about Azurite traits and off stats. So talking about the Azurite traits, we're going with the Icy Citadel Frozen Tempest build, which Icy Citadel grants you more strength based on the critical strikes you're going to be granting yourself during Obliteration, and it lengths out by quite a bit. Your critical strikes are also going to be a lot more than they previously were. When we explain about your Azurite neck pieces that we're going to be using, that's just absolutely insane. As for the secondary ability, we're going to be running some of that Frozen Tempest, as I explained with Gathering Storms before. You're going to have a lot more runes. Remorseless Winter is going to deal a lot more single target DPS, and our main goal when running either an Obliteration spec or an ice cast spec for consistent damage is going to be bringing the low DPS higher and trying to get higher end overall DPS than breath spec. But luckily this spec actually has an insane amount of burst opener and can open up for 60k plus single target, which is generally something only seen by breath spec, while still holding on to the overall consistency. And I believe this spec is going to grant us more consistency than the breath spec will in a 5 to 6 minute fight. Now, as you can see from my off stats, I'm going to talk about these real fast. I am running haste, or mastery over haste, and I'm not running critical strike. Now you probably think I'm crazy. Now originally when I was testing this spec, I was using a lot of critical strike, but it was up until I figured out the last piece of the puzzle when it came to the Azerite neck. Now we're going to open this up. Now obviously we're going to be sticking with main Azerite, blood of the enemy, to increase our critical strike stacks, and it's going to deal a lot of AoE damage in, let's say, mythic plus situations. But for single target, we're definitely going to be relying on the increased critical strike damage by 35%, since we are going to be granted a lot of extra critical strikes with the secondary Azerite neck. Now this was the key to the puzzle. This is the one that I knew was going to make a huge difference when it came to the breath spec, because when you're using Breath of Sindragosa, you have to use Essence of Focus, you have to use Memory of Lucid Dreams, or you have to use Vision of Perfection in your main slot to have extra runic power to actually have a long breath burst. So it was either going to be locked to main stat or off stat when it came to like the final piece of the puzzle that changed the Obliteration DPS overall. So what I did is I took blood of the enemy first, which I did a lot of testing with just that one alone without the secondary trait, and I switched over to breath, and breath was better than Obliteration. I was pretty sad because I thought I'd found something. I tested out the majority of extra, random damage procs and stuff, and it didn't work. So finally we're going to unveil where the actual secret to this puzzle was. It is up to the Unbound Force. Now this thing is absolutely crazy for Frosty K's, and at first glance you'd look at this and it says when a direct damage ability fails to critically strike. Now fails to critically strike, when I first read this I thought when you critically strike it went down, but no, it's when you fail to critically strike. So that way I just dropped all of my crit out the window, just all of my crit, and that's why I went haste instead, because I don't want crits, because the faster I don't get crits, the faster I get guaranteed crits, and that's going to give me a ton of overall extra damage on a Frosty K that you normally wouldn't have. Now we'll explain what makes this a little bit stronger in the future while we're GPSing on a test dummy, so I can actually show you guys where the strength comes from with this ability. So now I'm going to show you guys exactly what's going to make this trait so strong for Frosty K's for increasing our crit overall, because reaching 20 stacks really does sound like a lot, but direct damage causes it to proc more often. So keep this in mind, guys. If we use, let's say, Obliterate, we're going to get 1 stack, but since we have an ability like Inoctable Assault that's also going to proc, that's going to give us 2 stacks. Now let's say we have Remorseless Winter Up also hitting at the same time, just the normal as it goes and hits the target, that's going to be 4 stacks all at once. Let's say Frozen Pulse procs off on the target while we're hitting all those targets with those. That's going to be 5 stacks. So essentially, you have the potential to get 20 stacks within 4 obliterates of the opener on the target, granting you literally 100% crit for the next 6 seconds. Think about that, guys. Every Howling Blast at that point that you're proccing is going to be a crit. Every Obliterate is going to be a crit. Every Frost Strike is going to be a crit, regardless of what rotation you're using in terms of Obliteration, whether or not you're actually using your Obliteration in the beginning. Now, personally, I use the Obliterate proc on my pillar in the beginning to actually proc up a lot of DPS for the guaranteed crits, and then after that critical strike comes up, you just start going ham, laying into your Obliterate crits, and then laying onto any Howling Blast procs, because those Howling Blast procs within those 6 seconds is going to be just a massive damage dealer. There's even been times that my Howling Blast has been higher damage than my single target during single target Obliteration damage. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. And this DPS can proc up to about 60k, which is fairly equal to breath spec, and it actually is pretty insane. So let's go ahead and do some DPS. Now the important thing to do here obviously is to watch my stacks. Now this spec's obviously going to do a lot more DPS if you're using potions or you're using bloodlust. It could probably reach 80k or something like that, like an absolutely insane amount of DPS for single target obliteration. I don't think we've ever had this much single target burst potential on the opener of an obliteration spec. So what we're going to go ahead and do on this target here is I've kind of been switching up my opener on it, testing out different things, but what I found out is I generally just open up with pillar, run in on the target, hit Blood of the Enemy, hit Remorseless Winter, and then go into your normalized rotation. And generally the time around when you grant yourself 100% crit rating is when your DPS is going to proc around 60k. And then from there it's going to push around 45k, 40k, and drop down to around 30k DPS, where you usually hold around there, which breath spec generally with the build that I'm running with mastery crit is going to sit around 25 to below 30k definitely, and this spec's going to hold up just above it. So we're going to go ahead and DPS on the target, and I really think that's what's going to bring this spec ahead of breath if it actually does. We're going to have to do a lot more testing on it in longer fights to see exactly, but I'll go ahead and show you guys exactly what kind of burst potential this is working with. So we're going to go ahead and throw up our pillar, throw up our trinket. Obviously we're going to go in on the target, hit Remorseless Winter. We did that backwards, not going to matter. We're just going to go ahead and throw out our big obliterates on the target here. We got a Howling Blast proc, that's what we wanted. We're going to throw out our Empower just to have a big opener, because we really want to put as many runes as we possibly can into that Remorseless Winter to deal that big damage proc. Now we finally reached that crit point, and you can see our Frost Strikes and our Howling Blast and everything right there. We're just getting massive amounts of crits off the opener, and the more attacks we put out, the less crits we get, the more critical strikes we're going to have overall on the target as we're rotating our damage abilities. And you can see we're sitting around 40k DPS, which is absolutely unheard of when it comes to opening burst as Obliteration spec. Now the only way I was actually able to hit nearly anywhere near this amount of burst with the Obliteration spec was actually specking into Cold Heart. As you can see here, we're hitting our second pillar burst, which is going to give us a lot more damage, a lot more burst than we currently have, obviously because of just the way these crits work out. And you can see my Frost Strikes are critting the majority of the time. We're sitting at 30k DPS, not having a single problem in the world keeping our DPS up. Now what's going on with this spec, I'll go ahead and throw up the actual DPS meter so you guys can see what's going on, is the sheer amount of critical strikes we're getting. Right now our Remorseless Winter's proccing. We got 16 normal hits, 13 critical hits, which that is absolutely insane. That's like 46%, 47% crit rating for single target just based off our Remorseless Winter alone. Our melee attacks, we have a lot more crits than normal hits, which is just nuts. And as for our obliterates, we're going to have just an insane amount more obliterate crits than we previously had, just because of the sheer 100% crit chance along with the obliteration. As you can see there, we have what, like a 75, like 76, 78 crit percentage chance with our obliterates, and the same thing's going on with our Frost Strike. And as you can see on our overall damage, Remorseless Winter's on top. I told you Remorseless Winter's going to be an absolute beast heading into the new 8.2 patch because of the sheer amount of runes you're going to be obtaining, and of course the Azerite sets going on there. Now the other thing this spec's really good, as you can see, Inexorable Assault here is also doing fairly good damage, and it has a fairly high amount of crit. Now the ones that didn't crit obviously added to the crit chance of the rest of the abilities. Now if we were to combine our off strike or our Frost Strike offhand and our Obliterate main hand, these abilities are actually going to be higher percentage than anything else. That has been what we've wanted as Frosty Case the entire time this expansion, and we haven't been able to do it. Now if let's say we want to take this spec over here on the AoE rotation, guys, this is where the spec really gets crazy, because not only does your Remorseless Winter grant you stacks at single target, but if you're hitting 4 targets, it's going to give you 4 stacks. If you're Frozen Pulse procs, you're going to get 8 stacks towards your 100% critical strike ability. This is just blowing my mind, guys. I know too many numbers coming out. We should probably just hit this thing and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. Oh, all right. So we're going to go ahead. I have to hit Remorseless first on this, because if you hit Blood of the Enemy for some reason on these, it just resets your DPS meter and things go crazy. So we're going to go ahead and throw up our 2 abilities here. We're going to throw up Remorseless Winter first, and we're just going to go in and DPS on this stuff, opening up with that big Howling Blast and just trying to DPS as much as we can. We do want to try and Runic Starve ourselves as fast as possible, because we do want those Frozen Pulse ticking and leading us towards the extra crit chance. Now keep in mind, your Frozen Pulse is also going to be ticking on the target and is going to be critting during that 100% time. Now you don't get stacks of crit or extra procs during the actual 100% crit time, so it's going to be everything outside of that. So the more Runic Starve you are, the more crits you're going to get, the more non-crits you're going to get, and the faster that's actually going to stack up and give you an insane amount of crits with Frozen Pulse. Now I did mention before that you could also do that with Frost Scythe. With Frost Scythe, it's going to give you a little bit more upkeep overall than the Frozen Pulse build will, but overall it really won't matter which one you're running if you just want good DPS. I'm actually insanely excited to use this in future dungeons. Like, I've actually converted over on live with my Frost DK spec to running Pillar Remorseless Winter just because I love the overall feel, and I am using Breath on live still with it because it's too strong not to have with live build. But with these new Azurite pieces and neck pieces, this could absolutely be a game changer. As you can see, I'm not using any critical strike at all. Like, I just completely threw it out the window and completely rechanged what my stat priority was to grant myself this Obliteration burst build, and it has insane AoE. For like mythic pluses, this is definitely going to be viable. Like, not only is it going to be viable with that many targets to actually grant you extra DPS with this spec, I really would see, you know, let's say you have 10 mobs on you, you throw up Remorseless Winter, it procs 10 stacks on those mobs with just Remorseless Winter alone. You get a Frozen Pulse stack, you're going to have 100% crit in 2 seconds, and all your abilities are going to crit every time you hit the target. It's just absolutely blowing my mind. Now, I talked about this spec when it comes to PvP. It literally has the same effect in PvP. You get 100% crit on the target. You get a lot more opener burst DPS, and you really just shred people pretty hard. And in terms of overall tankiness, some of the classes that are using tanking weapons and survival trinkets, I was able to actually kill classes that were using tanking items as Frost DK. And the other thing that I would change out if you were going to, let's say, take this into PvP situations, just swap the haste out for versatility and you'll get a lot more survivability out of it. Toss on a couple survival trinkets and you will literally become a survival bursting monster of a Frost DK. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did. Comment down below if you have any questions or want to see this spec in action in the future. Obviously, I could see myself playing it a lot more now that I definitely enjoy this feeling a lot more, being able to push people defensive instead of having to be defensive on the Frost DK the entire time. But again, leave a like if you enjoyed this video. It'll really help me out, guys. Yeah, it feels good to come up with the good Obliteration spec. I honestly was doubting for a while that it was even going to happen. So, until next time, guys, this was your boy Hazzed.